Welcome to this evening's Committee of Adjustment meeting. Members of the public, applicants, agents, and staff may be participating this evening either in person or virtually via Zoom. For those attending via Zoom, please note that it is our standard practice for members of the public to have their cameras off and microphones muted until it is time for that member to speak. Township staff can assist with muting microphones. If you require assistance, please use the chat function and ask staff. I'm also pleased to advise that we are being broadcast live on the Township's YouTube channel, where a recording of this meeting will be available. Note that the Township does not have the ability to edit the live stream or recorded version of the meeting. Public meetings have been called and notice circulated in accordance with the Planning Act with respect to applications for minor variance and or consent. For the purpose of public meetings are to inform and provide the public with the opportunity to ask questions and express views with respect to the applications. The format of the public meeting is as follows. Township staff will introduce the application and report all correspondence received. Next, the applicant or their agent will present any relevant information. Township staff will then provide further information and clarify any statements of the applicant and or their agent. Following that, the public will be permitted to ask questions and express views on the proposal, and then the public portion of the meeting will be closed. Finally, members of the committee will be given an opportunity to ask questions for clarification of the application. After all comments have been received, the committee will consider the application with due regard to the presentations and views expressed this evening. The committee will then do one of three things: approve the application, deny the application, or defer the application pending receipt of additional information. Specified persons who have provided oral submissions or written objections but disagree with the committee's decision on the application may appeal their decision to the Ontario Land Tribunal as entitled under the Planning Act. The deadline for an appeal of consent application is 20 days within the giving of notice, and for minor variances within 20 days of the decision date. When commenting on an application, please first give your full name and address for the minutes. Please note that the names and addresses of those individuals who speak at the meeting will appear within the meeting minutes, which are public documents. If you wish to receive a copy of a decision, please leave your name and address with the township staff. Deadline proposal for an appeal of consent application. I think it. Okay. Within 20 days of the decision date. Disclosure of pecuniary on an application will please give your full name and address. Adoption of minutes. We can get a motion. If you want me to pause for a second, let me know. Motion C 2024-061, moved by member Hiles, seconded by member Vandergeest, that the minutes of the October 15th, 2024 Committee of Adjustment meeting be adopted as printed and distributed. We are carried. Adjourned applications. So would township staff introduce the application and report on any written response to the notice circulated for application for minor variance A-20-24?
Thank you, Chair. So our first application on the agenda this evening is an adjourned application returning following last month's meeting for the lands recognized as 2 Gray Street. As discussed at the last meeting, the applicant is seeking a minor variance to facilitate the construction of an accessory dwelling unit as a second-story addition to an existing single-story commercial building. At the October 15th Committee of Adjustment meeting, the application was initially deferred pending further information regarding Ontario Regulation 15304 with respect to records of site condition and further planning justification. Staff are pleased to advise that the applicant has since provided the required information, and therefore the application has been brought back for reconsideration. Just as a refresher for committee, the proposed minor variance to accommodate the accessory apartment is seeking relief from the required parking space for the apartment. So the bylaw requires 1 parking space for each accessory dwelling unit in a commercial building. The applicant has requested 0 on-site required parking. Correspondence received on the application. The chief building official just notes that their comments previously provided in the staff report D24040 are still applicable, and no other comments were received. So this as a bit of a refresher as well, the subject lands are identified here on the key map on screen. It's recognized as 2 Gray Street. It's just next to the Home Hardware building at the intersection there at Sturgeon Bay Road and Gray Street. This is an aerial imagery of the subject property. It is in the downtown commercial area surrounded by residential, institutional, and other commercial uses. This is a copy of the proposed site plan that's also included in the staff report and previously seen by the committee. So the slashed marking indicates the approximate location of the proposed second-story apartment. And some staff photos here from the site inspection. This is the existing building. And these are the proposed elevation drawings submitted by the applicant. As you can see on the top left is where the proposed accessory apartment is anticipated to go. As outlined in the staff report, the applicant had retained the professional opinion of Morgan Planning and Development, who submitted a letter on behalf of the applicant, which considers and evaluates the application under the prescribed policy, as well as the 4 tests for a minor variance. Planning staff generally concur with the opinion presented in the letter and have no objections. We would also note that further information and clarification was also received from the applicant's professional engineer. Staff are satisfied that the requirements of the township official plan with respect to the addition of a more sensitive residential use on a commercial property has been satisfied. Therefore, planning and development staff have no objections to the approval of the application, subject to the recommended conditions. Those being municipal taxes paid to date, that the property owner applies and obtains a building permit for the proposed development, and that the construction is in substantial compliance with the drawings and plans submitted with the application. We have a motion for committee if they wish to consider it.
Thank you. Do any members of the committee require further clarification or wish to provide comments on the application? If we can get the motion then. Motion COA 2024-62 moved by member Bossy, seconded by member Hawkins, that staff report D24-043 be received and that application for minor variance A-20-24 be approved, subject to the conditions outlined in attachment 6 to staff report D24-043. We are carried. The hearing for this application is now closed. You are free to stay for the remainder of the meeting or leave as the committee moves on to the next application. Would township staff introduce the application and report on any written response for the notice circulated for application for consent B-15-24?
Thank you, Chair. As noted, the application seeks a consent on the subject property recognized as 2368 Maple Valley Road. The application seeks to sever the dwelling and associated lands from the remaining cultivated lands as a surplus to the existing farm operation. The retained farmlands are proposed to continue to be maintained and operated by Lakeview Dairy Farm, who currently maintains the lands. Just as a summary of the application, the proposed severed lands would have an approximate area of 1.3 hectares with an approximate frontage of 8.5 meters along Maple Valley Road. Subsequently, the proposed retained lands would have a resultant approximate lot area of 44.3 hectares and a frontage of 674 meters along Brennan Line and Maple Valley Road, respectively. We have received some correspondence following the circulation of the application. Enbridge Gas has stated no objections to the application, however, states that they reserve the right to amend or remove development conditions. They have included the link for calling before you dig and indicate that it's the responsibility of the applicant to verify the existing gas servicing. Further, the Public Works Department has indicated that they can provide the applicant with a registered plan showing the Forest Road and Township turnaround easement on the subject property. As a condition, they would require that the easement be protected and not modified in any way, but have no further comments. The septic inspector has indicated that based on available septic records for the property, there is concern that the proposed lot line configuration may result in a slightly deficient setback to the existing septic system on the retained lands, which would maintain the existing dwelling. It's recommended that the applicants demonstrate compliance with the Ontario Building Code with respect to on-site servicing. You'll see later on in the hearing, staff have included a recommended condition that speaks to this point. But the applicant's agent is in attendance this evening, and I believe they wish to address the committee.
Thank you. I now call on the applicant and or their agent to please present your application together with any relevant information, whichever you prefer.
Right. Good evening, committee. My name is Jonathan Pauk. I'm a senior planner at Morgan Planning and Development here on behalf of our client, Adam Telford, with respect to consent application B1524 for their property located on Maple Valley Road. Next slide, please. The location of the subject property shown on the screen here is at the northeast corner of Maple Valley Road and Brennan Line. And it's generally located at the end terminus of Maple Valley Road. Next slide. The subject property has a lot area of approximately 45.6 hectares and has a lot frontage of 609 meters. Subject property is currently developed with a single detached dwelling, a barn, another accessory building, and is serviced by a septic and well. Shown on screen is just an aerial image of the subject property. The image on the right, as you can see, most of the subject property is comprised of agricultural land and is currently being farmed. And then the building cluster is located in that northeast corner. In the zoomed in image, as you can see, the two accessory structures being the barn and just another drive shed, as well as the single detached dwelling shown in blue. The septic is located, the septic is located just behind the single detached dwelling, which we've recognized through the recommended conditions that we have to verify the location of that septic. We have shown a conceptual area on the lot configuration sketch, which we'll show, but ultimately we will verify that through the reference plan that's recommended to also be included as a condition of consent. The subject property is zoned entirely agricultural and is designated agricultural as shown in yellow on the right-hand side and rural shown in white on in the official plan. I've kind of touched on, or staff kind of touched on these elements previously, but the application is for severance to sever the single detached dwelling from the balance of the agricultural lands. The intent of the application is to dispose of the surplus farm dwelling severance. Our clients, Adam Telford, is owner and operator of Lakeview Dairy Farms, and essentially they only want the agricultural land to be added to their agricultural land holdings, and they don't want to be a landlord and can continue to have the single detached dwelling. So and we've also submitted a concurrent zoning bylaw amendment application, which seeks to implement a few site-specific zoning provisions on the severed lot with respect to setbacks, prohibiting livestock in the existing barn structure, as well as recognize some of the rural residential use. The second part of the zoning bylaw amendment is to zone the agricultural lands to prohibit any future residential development. So ensuring the long-term protection of the agricultural use of those disposed lands, or the retained lands rather. This is just the proposed lot configuration sketch. The area in yellow is the agricultural lands to be retained by Lakeview Dairy Farms. And the parcel shown in green is the severed lot, which would contain the 2 accessory buildings and the single detached dwelling and septic and well. As part of our as part of our application submission, we did include planning justification report addressing the provincial planning statement, County of Simcoe official plan, and the township documents. So just in summary, our client Lakeview Dairy Farms wants to sever their surplus farm dwelling from the property and only contain those tillable agricultural lands. And the long-term protection of those agricultural lands will be ensured through the concurrent zoning bylaw amendment application. If there are any questions, I'd do my best to answer them. And we have also reviewed the staff report and agree with the recommended conditions. Thank you.
Thank you. Do township staff have anything further to add to the materials and information presented by the applicant or their agent? And any recommended conditions, which
Thank you, Chair. So as indicated by Mr. Pauk, the lands are located at the end of Maple Valley Road. I'll skip forward a few slides. Mr. Pauk provided a great overview of the application. So as outlined by Mr. Pauk, the applicant seeks to essentially sever the portion of the property containing the existing dwelling to recognize that as a rural residential use, with the remainder of the lands intended to be continued farmed through Lakeview Dairy Farms. The provincial policy statement as well as the county official plan do recognize this type of severance as a permitted type of development, provided that the lands containing the farmlands are rezoned to an appropriate zone to limit any future residential development of the property, just recognizing that the use of the lands would be limited to an agricultural use. As indicated by Mr. Pauk, the applicants are in the process of working through that in anticipation of the recommended conditions included by staff. Further to that, staff recommend that the severed lands be rezoned to a site-specific rural residential zone to recognize the size of the property as well as the proposed reduced frontage. As indicated, the applicant proposes to maintain 2 remnant farm structures on the property. It would be the choice of the applicant to either include that as part of their zoning bylaw amendment application with appropriate justification, or remove those structures or somehow demonstrate compliance with the Ontario or with the township zoning bylaw. Sorry. So all of these have been included as recommended conditions, and I will go over those now. So recommended conditions for provisional approval as included by staff, that the applicants apply and obtain at their own expense a zoning bylaw amendment to rezone the severed lands to an appropriate zone to recognize the intended residential use of the property. That the applicants apply and obtain at their own expense a zoning bylaw amendment to rezone the retained lands to a site-specific agricultural zone to prohibit residential development on the agricultural lands. Any accessory building or structure remaining on the severed land shall be decommissioned for livestock agricultural purposes to the satisfaction of the township, including any required building permits and demonstration of compliance with the township zoning bylaw, or seek site-specific zoning provisions to recognize the structures through the required zoning bylaw amendment application. Alternatively, the applicants would be able to obtain and complete a demolition permit for the removal of the structures. Any fees associated with the conversion or removal of the structures are at the applicant's own expense. That the property owners demonstrate compliance with the Ontario Building Code with respect to on-site servicing to the satisfaction of the chief building official. That the properties apply for and obtain an entrance permit at the expense of the applicant to access the retained farmlands if that is something required by the Public Works Department. That the property owners demonstrate no impacts or modifications to the existing easements in favor of the municipality on a portion of the severed and retained lands to the satisfaction of the Public Works Department. And the remainder of the conditions are pretty standard, as we've seen for other consent applications. Reference plan of the severed parcel be prepared and reviewed by the Secretary Treasurer prior to registration. A copy of the in preparation draft deed be provided for review. municipal taxes be paid in full up to the date of the request of the consent certificate. All fees associated with the application shall be paid for by the owner, and that the conditions set out be completed within 2 years of the date of this decision. But subject to the recommended conditions, staff have no objections to the provisional approval of the application.
Thank you. Are there any persons participating virtually by Zoom who have either questions or who wish to speak in favor or opposition to the application? Please address your questions through me. The applicant may be asked to respond to each party. When commenting, please give your name and address for the minutes. Are there any persons in attendance in person who have either questions or who wish to speak in favor or opposition to the application? Please address your questions through me. The applicant may be asked to respond to each party. When commenting, please give your name and address for the minutes. If there are no further questions or comments, I declare that the public portion of this application is closed. Do any members of the committee require further clarification or wish to provide comments on the application? We can get a motion. Motion COA 2024-063, moved by member Vandergeest, seconded by member Hiles, that staff report D24-042 be received, and that application for consent B-15-24 be provisionally approved, subject to the recommended conditions set out in attachment 5 to staff report D24-042. We are carried. The hearing for this application is now closed. You are free to stay for the remainder of the meeting or leave as the committee moves on to the next application. So we have application for consent B-14-24 and minor variance A-21-24. Would township staff introduce the application and report on any written response to the notice circulated?
Thank you, Chair. So our final applications this evening, as mentioned, are consent B-14-24 and minor variance A-21-24 for the lands 4244 Wainman line. So I'll start with the consent application for this, which is proposes the creation of one new residential lot that does comply with the minimum required lot area and frontage requirements of the zoning bylaw. Concurrently, a minor variance application has also been requested to recognize the proposed lot area of the retained lands, as well as recognizing and permitting an increased accessory building lot coverage on those retained lands. Both the deficient lot area and the increased accessory building coverage are a result of the severance by essentially reducing the lot area in half through this application. Planning staff, as described within our report, are of the opinion that additional information is required in order to determine consistency with the provincial planning statement due to surrounding land uses in the proximity of the subject lands. As a result of the giving of notice, two comments were received. The first from the building division requesting additional information in order to demonstrate that the proposed severed and retained lands can appropriately accommodate a sewage system in compliance with all required setbacks to property lines, wells, and structures. And the second comment received was from Public Works, stating that they had no concerns with the application and confirmed that there is available capacity in the drinking water system for the Bass Lake Marchmont settlement area to service both the severed and retained lands through a service connection agreement. Public Works did clarify that the retained lands would not be required to be connected to the municipal water system. However, there is the availability should the applicant choose to do that. The applicant's agent is in attendance this evening and does have a presentation for the committee, so I will turn it over to them. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call on the applicant or their agent to please present the application together with any relevant information.
Thank you. Again, my name is Jonathan Pauk, Senior Planner at Morgan Planning and Development, here on behalf of our client, Murray Locke, who's also in attendance. If there are any clarification questions, he is more than happy to answer those. As staff mentioned, we have submitted a concurrent consent and minor variance application for the subject property located at 4244 Wainman Line. Subject property is located at the southwest corner of Wainman Line and Elena Drive, as shown on the screen here, just north of Highway 12. The subject property is located in the Bass Lake and Marchmont settlement area at the, as mentioned, the southwest corner of Wainman Line, and has a lot area of approximately 4,087 square meters and has approximately 33.5 meters of frontage on the Wainman Line and about 121 meters onto Elena Drive. Subject property is developed with a single detached dwelling, an accessory structure, and is serviced by a septic and well. This is an aerial image of the subject property. As you can see, on the right-hand side, there's the existing single detached dwelling, and the septic is located in the front yard, and the accessory structure is located at the rear of the existing dwelling, and the well is approximately between those two structures. So both the septic and the well would be contained on the retained lot. And the vegetation obviously is shown generally along the property line. I do have some images later in my presentation, which will show a tight board fence that goes entirely along the southern interior lot line and along the western interior lot line. I guess that would be, yeah, or the rear lot line. The entirety of the subject property is zoned R1 and is designated entirely within the township's official plan as settlement living area. So just an overview of the proposed consent application. The consent in general seeks to sever the property in half. The retained lot would contain the existing dwelling, accessory structure, septic, and well. And the proposed severed lot is anticipated to host a future single detached dwelling, which would be serviced by a new septic system and is proposed to be connected to the water services that are available on Elena Drive. Summary of the proposed lots are included in the table on the screen. We have submitted a minor variance application, as staff mentioned, as it applies to the retained lot. So the firstly would be the lot coverage for accessory structures. So as a result of the creation of the new lot and the reduced lot area, it does exceed the maximum 5% of the permitted accessory coverage. As it relates to the retained lot, the minor variance is required because it doesn't comply with the minimum lot area required for private services. We have included justification in our planning report that speaks to this. And the intent of that minimum lot area provision is to firstly maintain character of the area, and secondly to ensure enough area is provided to accommodate a septic and well. And in this case, the retained lot is already serviced by those services. Next slide, please. Kind of just touched on this and jumped ahead. Again, just a summary of the minor variance application as provided in the table. This is a image of the proposed lot configuration. Again, on the right-hand side in the, call it the green, is the retained lot. Shows the existing well between the existing house and accessory building, and the septic in the white dash line in the front yard by the driveway. And then the red dash circle has been provided to demonstrate that the setback requirement to the existing well would not impede future development on the yellow severed lot. So, you know, building essentially a septic and a well and future buildings could be located on that severed lot, which would not impact the setbacks to that existing well. I just would also like to draw committee's attention to the setbacks on the severed lot. And as you can see on the dashed yellow line represents the minimum required setbacks as a result of the severance. So the minimum required rear yard setback of 7.5 meters would obviously be at the southern side, and similarly the front yard setback of 7.5 meters along the roadside. And then the interiors, I believe they're 1.5. So this is just to demonstrate that a building and septic could be accommodated here. I'd also like to just mention that as a result of these required setbacks, I have some photos in the presentation later, but there's existing mature trees along the southern property line and a tight board fence, which would be essentially preserved as a result of any future development on that lot, given that the setbacks would not allow for the removal of those trees. Next slide. Including in our application submission was a planning justification report evaluating both the consent and minor variance applications. And we've reviewed the applicable planning documents as well as the foretests of the minor variance. Skip over this slide. I've already touched on that. So through the application submission, we have identified that staff has deferred the application tonight for further information with respect to the requirement of a D6 study. A D6 study is a study that requires an evaluation of land use compatibility as it relates to dust, odors, and noise, among other things. And in this particular application, there are a few points that I'd just like to note that will ensure land use compatibility as a result of the severance. Firstly, the zoning of the property is not proposed to change. It's entirely zoned residential and would facilitate a residential use. Secondly, the required setbacks, as I mentioned, on the severed lot would ensure the preservation, or firstly, the separation from that adjacent use. So the adjacent use being CarStar Automotive. So it's an automotive repair business. And the setbacks that would be required on that severed lot would ensure separation between any future residential development and the adjacent automotive business. As mentioned previously, the maintenance of those boundary trees by the virtue of those required setbacks. So along the rear lot line, the mature trees and the tight board fence would be maintained and would provide privacy and buffering between those two uses. As mentioned, that tight board fence, I do have an image of that. The automotive repair business or bodywork repair business on that adjacent lot is required to adhere to certain industry requirements. So being noise, odors, and those sorts of things. And the paint and body shop are contained indoors. It's not, there's no painting that occurs outdoors. And it's in a controlled environment, and, they do have industry practices that they have to adhere to. So for those 6 items, it's my opinion that land use compatibility on the severed lot will be maintained. And it's our opinion that a D6 study shouldn't be required. Next slide, please. These are just some images. So on the left is the accessory building that is at the rear of the dwelling. And this is looking, I guess, south towards the CarStar property. So there's the tight board fence and the maintenance of those trees. Similarly on the right-hand side. So again, here's just a few images of the tight board fence and the vegetation. Obviously the leaves are off at this time of year, but in the spring and summer months, those would contain some additional buffering and separation and visual screening as well. And then this is just an image looking south from Elena onto the property. These are the trees that would be maintained in general in the front yard, except for maybe a future entrance might be removed. That concludes my presentation. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, as well as my client, Mary Locke. Thank you.
Thank you. Do township staff have anything further to add to the materials and information presented by the applicant or their agent? And any recommended conditions as applicable?
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Pauk's done a great job in introducing the application and going over some of the additional details, so I'm going to skip over a couple slides here. I did just want to point out to the committee the surrounding land uses on the property. So the subject lands are outlined in red on this slide. You can see that a majority of the surrounding land uses are residential, rural, or agricultural. There is some commercially zoned lands in this area, as well as the immediately adjacent property here, which, as confirmed by the MECP, is developed with an industrial activity, which does have separation distances as required under the MECP, the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Park guidelines. The sketch that was provided here, you can see the retained lands in blue and the severed in yellow. Just some site photos taken by staff, pretty similar to those that Mr. Pauk just showed. So you can see the existing dwelling on the property here, facing Wainman line with Alana Drive running down the side here. And similar on the side here, this is Alana Drive, looking at sort of where the severed lands would be. So as discussed throughout the staff report, the 2024 provincial planning statement does establish policies to ensure land use compatibility. These policies are in place to ensure the protection of existing industrial land uses. The policies are aimed to ensure they're there to ensure and protect the long-term viability of existing or planned industrial manufacturing or other major facilities that are vulnerable to encroachment by ensuring that the planning and development of proposed adjacent sensitive land uses is only permitted where potential adverse effects to the proposed sensitive land use are minimized and mitigated, and potential impacts to the industrial manufacturing or other major facility are also minimized and mitigated in accordance with provincial guidelines, standards, and procedures. As noted, there is a registered activity on the adjacent property considered by the MECP as a Class 2 industrial facility. Per MECP guidelines, there is a recommended separation distance between industrial activities and sensitive land uses. The proposed residential development, as described here in the application, is not able to achieve the minimum separation distance as recommended by the MECP. Therefore, in the absence of technical studies which identify those potential adverse effects of establishing the new residential occupancy, and as necessary, plan for the long-term viability of the existing industrial activity, it is the opinion of planning staff that the application at this point cannot be confirmed to be consistent with the 2024 PPS. Staff are recommending deferral of the application in order to provide the applicant with an opportunity to have those technical studies prepared as required by the MECP to assess the land use compatibility of this proposal. I do have a recommended motion if the committee would like to see that, but that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any persons participating virtually by Zoom who have either questions or who wish to speak in favor or in opposition to the application? Please address your questions through me. The applicant may be asked to respond to each party. When commenting, please give your name and address for the minutes. Are there any persons in attendance in person who have either questions or who wish to speak in favor or opposition to the application? Please address your questions through me. The applicant may be asked to respond to each party. When commenting, please give your name and address for the minutes. If there are no further questions or comments, I declare that the public portion of the application is closed. Do any members of the committee require further clarification or wish to provide comments on the application? Member Bossy.
Question to staff. I guess it's three parts. One, the red circle. the owner of the severed lot would not be able to build into that area. Is that my understanding? And that it would push them west into the trees. And also, how do you enforce or make aware the purchaser of that lot that he cannot build in that red circle?
Staff.
Through the chair to member Bossy, I would maybe look to have Mr. Pauk confirm, but I do believe that the red dashed line on this slide here is just the area of influence of the well on the subject property. So that area of influence actually wouldn't prohibit buildings or structures, but a septic system would not be permitted within that area.
Sorry, did we receive the documentation, like a planning justification report of the 4 tests with this application? I didn't see that in this.
Through the chair, yes, there was a planning justification report included as part of the application, which can be made available. It just wasn't included as part of the staff report.
Member Van East.
I guess through the planning department, with the reference to the D6 study, what are the setback requirements that would trigger that study?
So through the chair to member Vandergeest, this is definitely not my area of expertise, so I will try to summarize the comments based on the correspondence with the MECP. But it's my understanding that a class 2 industrial activity, which is registered on the adjacent property, has a 70-meter area of influence, as the MECP refers to it. Any development within that 70-meter area of influence that is a sensitive land use has to be evaluated for the impacts of both the residential use on the industrial activity as well as the industrial activity on the residential or sensitive land use. So it works in both ways. There is a minimum recommended setback to the zone boundary or the property line of a property that has an industrial activity registered of 20 meters. So in the case of this development, the property, I think it's 22 meters in width. It mostly is captured within that minimum recommended setback that the ministry has. So in cases such as that, that is where the technical studies prepared by a qualified professional would come in to assess those adverse impacts of both the industrial to the sensitive and the sensitive to the industrial, and suggest or determine whether or not there are any appropriate mitigation measures that could be implemented to minimize those impacts.
As I guess question through the chair, I guess, has that adjacent property owner that has that industrial use changed to in recent years to move to a class 2, or has it always been like that at this adjacent property?
There are no development approvals on file with the township for that property, so I can't really speak to that.
I guess through a comment through the chair, I'm obviously supported deferral to get this figured out. I don't know if it'd be a wording deferral requiring a study. I think planning department and Morgan Planning Development and the applicant need to maybe figure it out exactly what's required. And then bring back when it's appropriate. Obviously, there's still questions to be asked, so I would support a deferral.
Question to staff. So the ask here, just be clear, is a little over 50% of the lot area is the severance or the whatever they're asking for. They need 4,000 square meters and they're asking for a little over 2. Is that correct?
So through the chair to member Bossy, that is correct. So the severed lands are proposed to be about 2,000 square meters in lot area. As Mr. Pauk explained, though, because the severed lands would be connected to the municipal water system in the township zoning bylaw for the R1 zone, which these lands are zones. When connected to municipal water or a partial service, the minimum lot area requirement is 2,000 square meters.
I guess I meant the retained lot. All short.
Yeah, correct. So through the chair, the retained lands would be deficient in lot area based on what's required by the zoning bylaw because they would be privately serviced. So a well and a septic. The township zoning bylaw would normally require 4,000 square meters for a privately serviced lot in the R1 zone. However, a minor variance application has concurrently been submitted to permit that reduced lot area.
So I guess my one question, or I guess comment, I don't know if it's necessarily a question, but I don't know the exact arrangement of when these were all put into the current form that they are in. But I guess my question would be, to your point earlier, both properties basically have to essentially complete the study depending on how, if the industrial part came after the residential piece that's there or the residence came after. So that current dwelling on the retained land, in my opinion, looks like it's within the 70 meters. So what documentation is in place to either allow that current dwelling or the class 2 industrial property to be in existence in this time frame right now?
To the chair, so the MECP guidelines would only apply when you're proposing a new residential use or you're intensifying the use of those lands. So there are very specific exceptions within the MECP guidelines that state for an existing lot that has existing zone rights and is designated, in conformance in the township's official plan for that use, essentially the zone rights that the property have are sort of what's in place. So it recognizes those existing situations. It's when you go to add a new lot or create a new lot and intensify the more sensitive land uses surrounding the industrial activity that it triggers the requirement under those provincial guidelines.
East.
No, it's not. I did see Mr. Pauk put up his hand, so I don't know if you want to allow him the opportunity to speak or not, but I just seen that, so I just didn't want him to leave without being able to say what he needed to say.
If you have something, feel
Thank
free
you,
to
thank you, Chair.
voice your concerns.
I was just actually to member Bossy's point about the lot area. The lot area, as Mr. Oster described, was based on private services, and it's not or the retained lot is not proposed to be connected to the municipal water services. If it was, then it would comply with the minimum lot area requirement. Our justification is that because it's already serviced with a septic and well, that area has already been accommodated. So just wanted to provide that clarification. And I guess maybe one other item, member Vander Geest, like for the D6 study, it may, as staff mentioned, it may come back and say, if committee chooses to defer the application for the D6 study, it may come back to say that it does need some mitigation measures for that severed lot. I would suggest that the mitigation measures that might come back are some sort of screening or buffering. And it's my opinion that through the required setbacks on that severed lot, like the boundary trees are going to be maintained by virtue of those requirements, and that tight board fence will be maintained along both the obviously the current rear lot line, but the new interior lot line on the left, as well as the rear lot line on the severed lot adjacent to that use. Thank you.
No further questions? Go ahead and I'll ask.
I would just, if we're going to defer it, let's make sure the deferral is appropriate appropriately worded, right? So we aren't putting the applicant in a position where we're saying that they require a D6 study. Let's put it in a wording as such that, it's, pending further information or clarification, whatever, on not as specific, so that if it works out that it's not required, I don't want to see the applicant having to do more than what is required.
Would agree with that. Anything further? If we can get a motion, and then we'll see how it reads and if we want to amend it. I think it leaves it open, so I will read through the motion and then we can vote and we'll see what the outcome is then. So motion COA 2024-064, moved by member Bossy, seconded by member Hawkins, that staff report D24-041 be received, and further that in the matter of consent application B1424 and minor variance A2124, the application be deferred pending updated planning justification regarding land use compatibility, which may be subject to peer review at the expense of the applicant. And further that an updated site plan be provided to address the building division comment. We are carried. The hearing for this application is now closed. You are free to stay for the remainder of the meeting or leave as we move on to adjournment. We can get a motion for adjournment. Motion COA 2024-065. Moved by member Hawkins, seconded by member Bossy, that committee of adjustment be adjourned at 7:24 PM on Tuesday, November 19th, 2024. We are carried. Thank you, everyone.